live before he tells you.
How much bleeping?
No, we're coming live. Hold
No.
on. Sending data.
Is there going to be a lot of bleeping?
No bleeping on YouTube.
Okay.
Okay.
I want to get
live. Graham, kick it off.
Hi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it happens to be when you watch this. We are here today with Erik Mathy. And Erik is, among other things, the video star of Ride Slow, Take Pictures. Ride Slow, Take Pictures. Is that what it is? Ride Slow, Shoot Photos. Take Photos.
Ride Slow, Take Photos.
Yeah. Even though on his podcast, you might know him from the large format photography podcast. They just had a discussion about how we shouldn't be talking about taking and shooting. I was just listening to that, I don't know, 20 minutes ago or so. Anyway, Erik is with us to talk about making lenses and other fun stuff. But before we get into that, Erik, you hail from Wisconsin, but are now a Bay Area resident. Yeah, and that's not Green Bay area resident. You're from Green Bay, aren't you, originally?
Oh, yeah. Well, originally I was born and raised in just outside of Madison in a tiny little town called Mount Horeb, which is known as the garden gnome capital of the world, and also, sadly, now the former home of the Mustard Museum. The guy moved his mustard collection somewhere else.
How far from the Dells are you?
Yeah, exactly.
How far from the Wisconsin Dells were you when you were growing up?
Hour and a half. We never went, so I don't have a friend. We didn't go to the Dells until I was a teenager. Like, that's like the high school.
Well, that's when you should go to the Dells, I think.
Yeah, totally. Like, for us, it was a big trip to get into Madison on the weekends for the farmers market at the Capitol.
Oh, yeah.
And that felt like forever as like a 6-year-old kid.
I have a cousin who sells or sold, I'm not sure she's still doing it, goat cheese at the farmer's market. So maybe you bought goat cheese from her.
Probably not. My dad, not back then. No. I did love the farmer's market. You might have, yeah.
Well, okay, there we go. Okay, let's get back on it. So you are now in the Bay Area.
Yep.
How did you get from the land of cheese to the land of fog?
By a few other steps.
Programming.
Yeah. No, actually, no. I came out for, and this is a Wayback Machine moment. This might sadly age me, but no more than the pandemic has, I guess. But I came out here for the Googlers Prepare, the 24 Hours in Cyberspace project. It was the very first worldwide webcast and also photojournalism webcast run by a guy named Rick Smolin. If you remember back in the day, the books, the Day in the Life of books.
Yeah, sure.
That was Rick's jam. Okay. He still is, I think, but mostly he was like trying to be a photographer, photojournalist, whatever. And he sort of struck on this idea to do these 24-hour, these Day in the Life of books. And it was a good way to sort of like do a series of books, do these projects and kind of cash in and just have a thing to do. So the internet came around and he decided, this would be interesting to try to do a live broadcast of photographs of the internet and the impact of the internet over the course of 24 hours.
Yeah.
So I came out here for that to intern on it. I was just wrapping up my photojournalism sort of schooling at RIT, and RIT was pretty heavily involved in it. So I came out for that, and then I stayed on pretty much to work on the book and learn how to do stuff on the website. And then I just stayed out here doing website stuff because the photo industry in the 90s did not pay pardon me, I'm editing.
You can say those words on our podcast.
Yeah. Like I had done 6 months at Magnum, New York, and go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just thought it was a little odd that you drove all the way across the country to be on a webcast.
Indeed. So yeah, I mean, I had like some decent experience. I'd worked at Magnum, New York, and I was sort of at the top of my photo brain game, but nobody, like, I went to talk to Mother Jones, because Mother Jones, they did, and they still do at the time, like, really good photojournalism and stories, and they hire really good photographers to do it. But they're like, yeah, that's great. We'd love to have you on. When can you start? Oh, cool. No, this isn't paid.
Yeah.
And I was like, I have bills. I have to pay rent. Like I need to earn a living. So I stayed on and did web stuff.
I think that for commercial purposes, probably the least respected profession is photographer, because at some point, everybody's grandmother will take a picture that is worthy of putting over the couch. The problem is, the difference is that a professional has to do it every day, multiple times a day, and they have to nail it every time. But everybody thinks, well, oh, I got a DSLR, I can shoot it. So, yeah. So,
and I think that's even more so now, right? Because everybody has like the phone that'll take a really pretty picture that will look really good on screen. And the phone quality is getting better, so it might even make a nice 5x7, even like a pretty good 8x10 print for most people of that sunset from, wherever.
Well, and there are literally now billions of unpaid distributed journalists, and all the most important video is shot by kids and grandmothers. So
yeah. Although the counter to that is, like when I think it was the Chicago Tribune or the Chicago Sun-Times, one of the big Chicago dailies, like they fired all their photographers, and just had like equipped their reporters with iPhone 10s at the time, I think, and the images were just complete junk. Like they were junk, even at newsprint quality, which is 72 DPI. It's like newsprint is just really not the highest resolution. Actually, newsprint like 150. Anyways, like there was just junk, and they learned very quickly that you really do need to have people with not just a good eye, but good talent to handle a news situation, like to take a good portrait, to photograph a riot, to do investigative journalism. Like you can't just take your phone. Like you actually have to have some talent to do something other than a terrible snapshot. I mean, it's too late for those photographers who got canned, including, like, as I recall, like a Pulitzer Prize winning, like groundbreaking, one of the first groundbreaking like black photographers in Daily News was one of those staffers. He was a freaking legend. Like, and he got canned, and it's just like soulless corporate bullshit. Not that I have opinions on this, but I might have opinions on this. So it's
no, it's absolutely true. My dad carried a camera on his first newspaper job, and fortunately he only had 3 or 4 exposures worth of film with him, so it didn't distract him too much. But as soon as he was promoted, they gave him a photographer. He was able to pay attention to the interview and not have to think about getting the shot.
Right.
So you head out to San Francisco. You kind of stick around. So you started out in photography. You started out studying photography. You're a photojournalist.
Yeah, or it was, or I don't know what the hell I am.
You're trained as you studied photojournalism.
Fair.
Okay, there we go. So let's back up to your time dunking your SRT 101 in the Wisconsin Dells because you weren't paying attention. Wait, okay, so when did you first pick up a camera? What was your introduction?
I was a junior in high school.
Who gave you the first hit?
My mom.
Okay.
I don't know why. I don't know why she did. To this day, I think I asked her once, and she just said, "I thought you'd find it interesting," but. She had a Pentax K1000. It's still in their house, which in my memory feels like a small camera, but I picked it up recently. I'm like, God damn, this thing is a tank. Like, K1000s are not small cameras. So she had a Pentax K1000 with a couple lenses and I think maybe a flash. and she called me into their room, which is where she had the camera, and she pulled it out and said, okay, this is the camera, this is how you focus, the little needle on the side, get it in the middle, go for it. And that's where it started. I started shooting.
And how old were you?
I think it was a junior in high school.
Okay.
Yeah, and I started taking photographs for the yearbook.
Yeah. Okay, so you were hooked at that point, right?
Yeah, because when we moved up to Green Bay from Madison, there were two guys, Jesse Lindo and Michael Holden. They were thick as thieves. They sat in front of me in my first classroom, and I was like, these two cats are so cool. And they drew. They were really, really good drawers. Like, they'd draw stuff and they'd sell stuff. Jesse, already at that age, had the hustle. He still has the hustle. He's still a friend of mine. And I so badly kind of wanted to be more like those two cats, So I tried to draw, and I couldn't draw. Like, I could not draw what I saw to the degree I wanted to. It really frustrated me. But once I picked up the camera, I was like, oh, I don't have to draw. I can use this thing and get it this way. And honestly, without the work of learning how to draw, like, maybe it was just a shortcut. Little did I know, I was just introducing myself to a hell of a lot more work than drawing, possibly.
Well, you know what they say about shortcuts. It's always the long way to get there. It takes years to learn how to draw, but you still, at the end of it, just need a piece of paper and a pencil.
That's true.
Yeah, or a stick that's been burned. Yeah. So, okay. So, and why photojournalism? Why didn't you go fine art? What was the photojournalism aspect of that?
That's a really good question. I think growing up in like Green Bay, Wisconsin, fine art didn't exist.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Right, you know what I mean? Studio photography didn't exist. I don't think like advertising photography or product photography or those who are more commercial outlets, I really like register them as a thing, you know what I mean? But at football games or out and around, like, you'd see the newspaper photographers at the sidelines.
Okay.
Like, you'd see, that was the most not to say in your face, but the most like immediate example of, besides like the photographers around town who took high school portraits, right? Those are the most immediate example of photographers. And it actually, the woman who took my high school portrait also became a good friend. She's immensely talented, really, really great. And she and I struck it off immediately. So in retrospect, I probably could have interned or worked with her and taken up studio and portrait photography, because she was crazy good and really successful and just a gem of a person. So I guess I can't say that the only in-your-face example was photojournalist, but maybe it was just the most exciting thing.
Right.
And then the second part of that is, my folks were always really active in like volunteerism and nonprofit work. So like, my mom sat on the board. My mom was an executive in a local, actually a national insurance carrier at the time, based in Green Bay. And so she was on boards like the Big Brothers Big Sisters, Green Bay Symphony Orchestra, Green Bay Community Foundation Fund, Breast Cancer Family Foundation. Like, Mom was always doing board work, doing volunteer work, running events. And my pops was always just rolling his sleeves up, and if something needed to happen, my dad was going to do it. Like, we started playing soccer, Dad was scheduling the soccer league. We joined Drum Bugle Corps, Dad was on the road with the Drum Bugle Corps. Some family needed food for a week around Christmas, Dad was fucking cooking for a family for food for a week. So with that example, I guess I started wanting to tilt a bit more at windmills, I guess. And photojournalism is theoretically a vocation that you can have an impact on the world that's for the better, right?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Theoretically, at least, right?
Yeah, if you think of the, some of the photographs that came out of Vietnam that changed Americans' attitude towards that war.
So Eddie Adams, man, he's still running his workshop.
Yeah. There we go. So okay, so you let's fast forward. You go to San Francisco. You start working in the web industry, and so what were you shooting all along, or were you? Yeah, what brought you back?
I stopped shooting for a while in San Francisco. I think when did I really start shooting again? I mean, I shot a little bit in San Francisco, maybe the first 3 or 4 years, but I stopped for a while. I don't know, 20s, mid-late 20s. You find other things to occupy yourself. I found bicycles, girls, alcohol, living in San Francisco.
Right. Yeah, I was. I'm thinking.
Yeah, I'm gonna say the same thing happened to me, and I really regret not using my camera more, because that was probably some of the most colorful photographic material I ever forgot to take pictures of.
Yeah,
I do have some
absolutely.
old rolls I should really develop.
Stan developed 2 hours.
So okay, so you what brought you back?
There was a little stint there where I got back into motorcycle photojournalism. I was working in motorcycle shops. I took a break from web development and like technology in general, and just worked in motorcycle shops for a couple of years. Raced motorcycles.
What's your bike? What's your everyday rider?
I don't have one anymore.
What was your everyday rider? I don't have one anymore either.
I had at the end, I had a couple of really fun ones. I had a mid 80s Yamaha TT600 Enduro that had been converted over with a street plate.
Okay.
And Honda CBR 600 wheels. Like the original,
okay.
No, the original one.
Not the big
CBR. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was like a total like torque, pull your arms out.
Yeah.
Mad Max street supermoto.
See, I had you pegged as a Ducati guy.
It was not. No, man. Ducatis. They're like. I'll say this tongue in cheek because we used to say this in the motorcycle industry, and I can also say this about certain a lot of stuff from Italy. They're really expensive. They're beautiful, and they're deucedly hard to maintain.
Yeah.
Just like some Italians I know. So I was in the motorcycle industry, and some friends of mine started up a new weekly publication in San Francisco called SF Street Moto. So I picked up cameras and started shooting. I went and I photographed the Bol d'Or, the 24-hour endurance race in France, because a couple San Francisco locals were like AMA national race regulars, had raced the Isle of Man many, many times. For the readers, the Isle of Man is one of the most insane motorcycle races on the planet.
People die on the regular.
Oh yes.
They're spinning around.
It's
inch from a wall at 180.
So context: it's a motorcycle race that races around the perimeter of the Isle of Man. Yeah, and it's like they're brushing shoulders on brick fences, and taking jumps over hills, and it's just nuts. Like it's
and the sidecar guys on that are
they're crazy. Yeah. So two San Francisco locals who raced the Isle many times and met a lot of British guys over there, got invited to race on Ralph's endurance team. Ralph is this old British guy. He might have passed a fixture on the world endurance scene. Always runs a British team, and so he invited the two Craigs over to race with him on the Bol d'Or on a big ZX10, a big leader bike. At the time, the U.S. was in the Iraqi War. It was just, the U.S. was hated. And I remember, during the national anthem, they play the national anthem for every country that has a racer. And they go through, they played God Save the Queen. The French boo the shit out of them, right? And, the Brits are nonplussed. They're used to it. Yeah. And then they start to play the Star Spangled. And the Brit guys, which is the entire team, were ecstatic because oh man, someone's gonna get booed more than us.
Yeah.
And sure enough, man, the French booed the shit out of that anthem. But I photographed that. That was a really fun experience. The French are crazy. And took a little break for a while, and then I started doing.
What time frame are we talking here?
This would have been 2005.
Oh well, if okay, yeah, I was going to say if it's the first Iraq War, isn't it 2001?
No, it was the second. It was like it was like 2004, 2005. I'd have to go back and look it up and see find the dates. And then I started doing long bicycle trips. I raced the Tour Divide, and which is a 2,700 mile solo bicycle race from Banff, Canada, the U.S.-Mexico border.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm not bright. Let's just like put this out there straight up. Like you're going to discover I'm not particularly bright.
Start in snow, end at 115 degrees.
Yeah, actually, that year, yeah. But I'd previously done it on a motorcycle a few years prior. I did it solo in 5 days flat from border to border on an XR600R as a cancer fundraiser. Most of the stuff I've done is a fundraiser of some kind. Back to windmill tilting. So I felt like I should go back and do it on a bicycle because I kind of felt like I cheated on the motorcycle. I mean, it wasn't easy. Don't get me wrong. It was not easy on the motorcycle, but the bicycle was just something I felt I should go back and try to do. So I picked up cameras then because you're riding these beautiful areas. I mean, just stunning places. And I picked up cameras again then, digital. And then did a trip from Crescent City down to San Francisco, down the Lost Coast of California.
Okay. With
one of my best friends, and then a guy who became one of my best friends through that trip. And I took a film camera and a digital camera, two film cameras and a digital. And after that trip, I was going through the film and I was going through the digital. And two things struck me. One is that you couldn't get the digital and the film to really work together. Like the images were just so different. And two, I just like the film more. I like the film so much more than the digital. And it was a nice little digital. It was a little Canon S90, which is one of my favorite ultra compact digitals. Like those things are genius. Those S90s, 100s, 105s.
Right.
Fucking fantastic little travel cameras.
They're the size of a wallet.
Yeah, and you can one-hand them. And with that front control dial on a bike when you're riding, you just pull it out of the bag, spin it to where you need it, shoot it. They're brilliant, and with a metal body, they can take a little bit of a beating. Those cameras are genius, honestly.
So can I ask you why you couldn't get film and digital to work together? Because that's something I work on all the time, and I feel like it can work. I'm curious.
It probably can, with like the right filters and the right fucking around and the presets and like finding a recipe. Like, okay, I just shot whatever film. I think at the time I was shooting the super bright poppy consumer like Fuji 400, Reala, I think it is. It's actually the stuff you get in Walmart or CVS at the time, which I like. I like those contrasts. Some people hate it, but I was like, I like the semi-cartoony C41 film that Fuji made. So I'm sure with the right Lightroom filters to introduce the right grain and the right sort of contrast or whatever, you could do it. But at the time, I personally wasn't really that into dicking around in Lightroom to try to match it. And
you also apparently felt that they should match, and that there wouldn't be a way to make two separate streams of visual imagery in
Exactly. They're
I
two
think there
different.
is a way to do that, and you kind of do it now because your work now combines very old-fashioned photography and modern videography, and I think there's a way to make it work.
I think there's a way to make it work. Although to be honest, like
editorially.
Yes, editorially. I mean, at the time I was publishing my stuff on Exposure, so it's just like images and whatever. But like from a clarification standpoint, like I don't do video. Like the Rise Slow Take photos, I'm just weird to say, I'm just a subject. I had nothing to do with the production of that movie, the direction of that movie.
You're the star, baby.
I was nothing besides just the subjects. Like I had no control over anything.
Nothing but the star of the film.
Jackass.
Don't worry about me. I'm just like the Brad Pitt.
No, actually,
you owe me.
Brad Pitt
you
does
owe me
nothing. He
drinks
doesn't
for
even hold the camera.
I've actually seen that movie, and I think that the star of the show is Wayne Martin Belger. So
yeah, well, true. Like, dude, I've got to compete with that guy right now. I'm not gonna say compete, but like I'm building a lens for a camera he's making. So like the lens has got to roll with a Wayne camera, and that he hasn't even started. So I'm like, oh God, here we go. I have a lens going on a Wayne camera.
But that releases you from having to make it work with his. He's got to make the camera work with your lens.
That's true. That is true. But it's going to be gorgeous. Like it's going to be a Wayne Martin Belger camera. It's going to be completely off the hook. It's going to be just bonkers.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get him on. You can get him on to talk about it when it's done.
Yeah. Okay. So you at some point pick up, now is it a baby speed graphic that you have, or is it a regular 4x5 speed graphic?
It's actually, it's the idiot cousin of both that everybody hates.
4x3?
It's the 3.25 by 4.25.
Yeah. Okay.
The total accident purchase. Like we were coming back from camping and I was like looking to get, I'd already shot, I was looking to get 4x5. I was prepping for Route 66 where I wanted to bring a 4x5, which I later did with a travel wide. And I was just perusing Craigslist and ended up finding like way north of here, because we're camping north of here, like a Craigslist listing that for speed graphic. Yes. That some dude who clears out storage units for a living had found clearing out a storage unit. And he thought it was a 4x5. And so we stopped in a Starbucks parking lot and met him in Santa Rosa, like way north of here on the way home. And I hurriedly grabbed it and I looked at it and I was like, okay, well, it's pretty clean. It's relatively good. Like the shutter, I don't really know how these shutters work, but they seem to work okay. Cool. It looks to be 4x5 size. Got home, the 4x5 film holders I bought didn't fit anywhere close. And I was like, son of a bitch, this isn't a 4x5. What the hell size is this?
Yeah.
There's no film for this.
Yeah. Nick has a baby speed graphic that I got essentially the exact same way. So
mine was sent to me by KEH by mistake. I ordered and paid for a baby speed graphic, and they sent me that. And I thought, well,
4x3.
It's really nice. Like, it's perfect. Nobody's used this in 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Not 100 years, but 60 anyway.
Yeah, at least 60, 70.
Yeah, and they actually turn out to be one of the coolest of the Graflex cameras once you figure out how to adapt to a 4x5 holder, because they have a bellows as long as a 4x5, but they're more compact.
Do you have
so they're nice to use.
Do you have the Graflex back on that, or is it the spring back?
No, I have a back made by our friend
20th Century Camera,
Washington.
Okay.
Yeah. And it centers a 4x5 Graflex holder on the lens circle, and it uses the existing screws and hardware, so you don't modify the camera in any way.
So it'll even work with the old school spring backs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It will, but I'm using it with 4x5 roll film holders and medium format lenses.
Got it.
So it's really a great like field camera for medium format.
Okay.
I think buying the wrong size speed graphic is a rite of passage.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. So I don't think that's so. I'm working a little bit forward now. It came with a lens, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Came with a classic Ektar 127-47.
Excellent. I've got one of those as well. But you, at some point along the line, decided that you needed to make your own. So what kind of fever dream was that? And
It was a fever dream born of anger and frankly poverty. I'd done Route 66, and Route 66 is amazing, by the way, on a bicycle or by car. And I was like, well, this was pretty cool. What's old in Route 66? Like, it sort of started a fascination with these old transit routes. Like, how is a country really created? It's created by the transit routes, right?
Sure. So it's either on a river or it's where the railroad came.
Exactly. Right. Like it's water spot to water spot through the desert. as I found with Butterfield Overland Mail Route, like it goes way the hell out of the way of what we consider now to be the modern route to Phoenix from Yuma, because it went up to the wells to get water. Right. So they didn't do the straight shot from Yuma to Phoenix. They went up way the heck over and then back down to Phoenix because of water.
Sure. And today we do that with whether or not the town's on the interstate highway, right?
Well,
if
actually,
it's on the interstate, it grows, and if it's not, it doesn't.
Exactly. And with Route 66, it was interesting because a lot of, and we're totally segueing away from lenses, but we do that. Like Route 66 was fascinating because there's a ton of little towns that Route 66 went through that prospered and were like these, because Route 66, like the journey was the destination. Well, you weren't getting to Chicago. It was what was between LA and Chicago that was interesting.
Sure.
It was the experience of it versus now we fly. We want to be dropped into experiences. We want to get on a plane, come here, be dropped into an experience, get on a plane and be dropped back home. We don't really want to see what's between A and B anymore. So, but yeah, on Route 66, like the new interstate would be literally a quarter or half a mile away from the downtown of these little towns, right? Mm-hmm. And some smart person would put in a gas station, a cheap ass Motel 8, and a Subway sandwich. And the downtowns died. Those little towns died. They're gone. They're ruins. There's barely anybody there.
There's just a string of that cutting right through New Mexico. Right? You can see some of them because I-40 came in, you know, in some cases 200 feet to the south or north of Route 66. And you pass by these towns, there's not even an exit, and it's just like empty house, abandoned gas station. Abandoned hotel or hamburger stand, and then you're like back through the desert for 100 miles. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
I live in a town that decided that they did not want the interstate coming through, and it killed the downtown. Absolutely killed it. You know, because the interstate's now 25 miles east of here.
Yeah.
And my wife's grandfather was on the commission that interviewed people, you know, business people. Do you want the interstate coming through here? Because it could have followed it. We're on a U.S. highway, or U.S. Highway 17, and it could have followed that and gone right through town.
Yeah, but it wasn't gonna bring you the opera, man. It was gonna bring you some motels and some diners. I mean, so
yeah. Well, but it also, but it also would have passed probably close enough to the downtown area to keep it alive.
Yeah, you know, versus dropping.
So that's an interesting point, though. I've been visiting much more remote towns that have suffered the same fate without anything to do with transit. And for instance, in a lot of agricultural areas, it's modern, super high-tech tractors that have replaced 50 people's jobs. You know, I met a guy. He and his son and one helper manage a 5,000-acre dry wheat farm. Two guys do all the labor. Two guys and two massive John Deere tractors that are basically have artificial intelligence built into them.
And 100 years ago, that would have been 160 acres that they could have done. So
actually, this guy had been there for generations, and all the machinery that they had discarded was in one big pile, and it went all the way back to the old wooden-built combines, which took, you know, big teams of itinerant labor to manage. And so what you saw was empty houses scattered everywhere. Because they just don't need people anymore in that part of the world.
At least for that crop. I mean, there are some crops that still require, for now at least, like some level of care for hand picking. Not for long. You know, things like
there are robots that can do lettuce now.
Yeah, I would say lettuce, melons, things that have really different strawberries that are really difficult to pick without bruising or messing up. But even then, you know, like what I found when I rode through Central Valley and a bunch of other places, you know, and talked to some ranchers and people who started in high school picking those fields, you know. Another hot topic in America is like, who's gonna do that backbreaking labor? American kids aren't gonna do that backbreaking labor. Immigrants can do that backbreaking labor, right? They're not here to steal your jobs. No American kid is gonna do that job, ever.
Okay, I'm definitely not anti-immigration, but I think it remains to be pointed out that people don't do those jobs because those jobs don't pay. But if
actually they do. When I rode through there, they're advertising $15 to $18 an hour to pick those fields.
Yeah, but
like
if
more
people
than,
don't
more
want
than
to
you
do
can
those
make
jobs
at
at
McDonald's.
$15 or $18 an hour, maybe those jobs are underpriced. You know,
Well, that's fair.
maybe
That's
that
fair.
should be a $50,000 job. You know,
But it's also for 3 weeks, and
No, well,
yeah, and then they have to move on. That's part of the problem.
well,
So
it's like a seasonal 6 to 9, like the housing that I photographed down at Weed Patch Camp, and boy, are we like not going anywhere close to cameras right now. You know, that housing unit that the local county runs, which is where the Grapes of Wrath was actually in the real world set, Weed Patch Camp, where the Okies ended up. There's still housing there for migrant labor. It's open, I think, 8 months a year.
Yeah.
And the same families come generationally, year after year after year, generation after generation. Like the kids that were there as kids are now adults there with their kids. It's a generational thing. It's what they do, and then they go back to where they came from, and they live on those earnings for 4 or 5 months, and then they come back and they do it again. And they see it as an honest work and a genuine thing to do, you know. And they're not wrong.
I think there's a range of occupations. So there's a lot of itinerant work in Washington State, but there's also a lot of permanent residents of Mexican descent who, you know, put their kids through high school there, and there's just a lot of different levels of occupation.
Right.
It's not one size fits all.
Yeah, totally. But so Handmade Lenses.
Yeah.
I remember the question. I was looking at doing the Pony Express.
Okay.
Right, because that's older than Route 66. So I started playing around with the idea of using equipment or lenses of the vintage, and looking at old brass lenses. You know, because you get, if you can photograph the Pony Express 1800s, you're looking at beautiful old brass lenses.
Oh yeah, sure.
But then we got hit with the rent increase, and I had like $25 to $50 a month tops to spend on all photography, including film, going to Looking Glass to develop it, film, supplies, anything. I had no money at all. But those lens designs seemed so simple, right? They're just like 2 chunks of glass and a tube. What could go wrong? A lot could go wrong. Pro tip. So I started poking around. Found I believe it was not on Instagram. One of the photographic social media networks, a DIY lens group, and like the guru of that group put up that formula that you grabbed, that Ethan hates because it uses the term back focal length. Anyways, and
that's not why I hate it. I think it's accurate, but it is too many variables that you
it's
can
a
cut
starting
out.
point.
Simplify.
It is a starting
point. It's like the ending point. It allows you to make way more complex lenses than I would ever deal with. I would simplify with symmetry to make it much simpler, but okay, it is. I don't have like a okay. I'm gonna shut up now.
Okay,
I poked the bear. Sorry, Ethan. Sorry, brother.
So for those of you who are listening and driving, we'll have this in the show notes. But the little formula is here. Hang on a second. Is right here. It's available as an open Google Doc.
Cheater.
And yeah, exactly. So for instance, in fact, actually this 105 lens separation 6 is a lens that I've got right there. So
Shorty.
Hey Ethan, do you have this up on the screen so everybody can see that I'm screen sharing? I don't think he does yet. But what this is a formula for a 2-element or a 2-unit. What am I trying to say? Yeah, a 2-element, 2-group lens So there's a front lens, a back lens, the separation, and these are just simply focal lengths. And then as you separate them,
front lens, back lens separation.
Yeah, and so a focal length. This is the focal length of the lens, and then it also calculates the back focal length, which is how far away from the imaging medium it needs to be. So if I change one of the elements, this separation. Now, right now, this is with two 105 elements. It's a 54 millimeter lens that the back lens.
Oh, hold on one. Keep talking. Just give me a sound check. Oh, okay. Hold on. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that, guys. We had a little bit of technical difficulty on my end. I was fiddling around with OBS when I should not have been, but okay. We're
So
back.
we might have lost some.
We're back. Okay.
We lost like 35 seconds.
Okay.
Thank you, Dale Willits, for pointing that out. I appreciate that.
Oh,
Thanks, Dale.
yeah. Hey, Dale. Okay, so you started thinking, what was wrong with the 127 hectare?
Well, again, I was looking for something that was maybe more period, right?
Oh, yeah, right.
And
Okay.
I tend to go down intellectual rabbit holes a little bit. But regardless of my talents or my ability to actually execute, I'm going to at least dive in there and sort of look and see what I have, or at least what's
I
there.
would say that is your superpower for sure.
Rabbit holes? Yeah, probably.
Rabbit man.
And rabbit homes.
No, but just curiosity honestly, that leads you down some ridiculous path, right? where you probably like have a pain in your head until you can figure something out.
Yeah.
It's both like an Achilles heel, and it's it has led you to figure some things out that really none of us have, which is amazing.
Well, no, and I don't think.
Well, basically, when you encounter a small cake that has a label that says "Eat me," you eat the cake.
I eat the cake, and then I try to figure out if I could also make that cake. And typically I can't, but it's interesting trying to figure out if I can. So the very first thing I tried to do with that formula and superset, I completely did the math wrong. Like, completely did it wrong. I completely foobarred it, ordered stuff just wrong. I ordered a pair of 90 millimeters. And of course, on a 4x5, that's not going to work. It makes a 45 millimeter lens. Like, that doesn't work.
Yeah, it's too close to the lens plane.
Yeah, totally.
film plane.
And I just ended up like, I remember it in sort of frustration, a little bit of frustration, and also just like curiosity. I was like, well, what will one of these do? And I rolled it up in $1 bill. It's what I had handy. Because one of the other challenges I had is how I'm going to make barrels for these things. Like they come in different diameters. It's really difficult to find like the exact. This is before 3D printing blew up, to be clear.
So this
and
is
so
also
yeah.
because you're rolling it in dollar bills. We know that this is also you weren't smoking a lot of blunts at this point.
Nope, not at all. Never actually, oddly, weirdly enough, being in San Francisco as long as I have never.
Erik Mathy was strictly a cocaine man.
Strictly caffeine and alcohol. I've never even done that. Boy, me on cocaine would be a terrible idea. God, that'd be really bad. Anyway, so
go ahead.
I rolled it in $1 bill and threw it on the speed graphic, and it made an image. I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. Okay,
is a perfect lens for that.
Yeah, and then I used metal washers that were the right diameter with different hole sizes. I just went to the hardware store, and then I used a permanent marker and blacked them out, and then I used Scotch tape when I wanted to change the aperture, and I threw them on the back of the lens.
Okay.
And I had a work trip to, I can't remember what little city I had to go to for a work trip, and I took that with, and I just shot a bunch of paper negatives, and they sort of came out kind of cool. I was like, okay, it's something. It was cheap. I had maybe $4 into it.
Had you been shooting paper negatives previously on a different project, or this was your first time with it?
I think I've shot paper negatives here and there before. I think anybody who goes to like photo school ends up shooting some paper negatives at some point because it's a really cheap way to do it. And getting into large format in the first place was also an exercise in how cheaply can I do this. Like, never really have money. So like commercially, buying commercial film is pretty much, for the most part, a complete non-starter. $1 to $2 to $3 a sheet, just like can't do that. So X-ray film, 15 cents a sheet once you cut it down. YOLO, great, perfect. Let's do this. Awesome. Fine.
Yeah, in California, changing the aperture is a seasonal event, so Scotch tape is.
Yeah, exactly, man. Sunny F16, fire in the hole. F8 in the case, actually with like Route 66, I spent most of Route 66 at like F11. F8, I shot lithofilm pushed to 25 ASA, that I then, which 1/25th of a second at F16 gives you 1/100th at F8. So most of Route 66 is 1/100th of a second at F8.
Okay, so let's stop a second and talk about what that does to your images. When you have, you're shooting with a Canon AE1, okay, so you're just changing your shutter speed and your aperture with a dial right on your finger.
Yep.
So you're getting shot to shot completely different photographic setups.
Yeah.
But when you have to take your lens apart, or you have to tape on a new washer, you are then starting to get a real consistent image quality, image setup. And so that can create a body of work just from that part.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, I designed most of like the dollar bill lenses. I ended up once they bit, and I really started doing them. And a certain amount of it was definitely like performance art of like, dollar bill, making lens out of dollar bills because of like the cost of living in America. Like there was a certain amount of performance art in that for sure.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't spend €1 on one of these.
Oh, I would, for sure.
And it definitely opens up the possibility that you could market your lenses in the dollar store.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Although you need more than $1 typically. You need at least 2, depending on the diameter of the lens. The one I took on the Butterfield trip was actually 4, because a single dollar bill doesn't have the rigidity and strength required for a sizable piece of glass, right? Like this one right here is $4. It's
okay.
We're getting into the luxury market now.
Yeah, exactly. It's you end up grouping the dollar bills into pairs. right?
Okay.
And folding them over, so it gives that little bit of extra rigidity. What a lot of people don't realize is American dollars are actually they're less paper and more fiber. They have a ton of strength. Like these things are super strong. They're actually more fiber and cloth than they are paper. They're really, really, really strong. And when you cut them, they don't shed like normal paper sheds a lot. It creates a lot of like dust and stuff. These, if you do a clean cut, you get very little stuff going in the inside on your lenses. That's the other important thing. Like whatever you make a lens barrel out of has to not shed, because otherwise you get all sorts of dust and crud inside your lens. And if it does shed or it sheds a little bit, you have to make your lens in such ways that you can take it apart to clean it. Commercial lenses that are made out of metal and steel, like the Quantaray, they're really well sealed inside. You're very rarely going to get much dust inside, right? Unless you go do something really crazy. But when you like literally roll your own, there's a pretty good chance you can get some stuff inside. But what I end up doing was cutting a slit between the elements for waterhouse apertures, just like the old Petzls. And then I would make those, I don't think I have any in front of me, originally out of really, really thin carbon fiber. I'd played with using like 1/4 millimeter, like super, super thin carbon fiber stock, which you see a lot in motorcycles. You get that stuff and use it for wraps. You do this for all sorts of things. As the barrels, but it's too strong. Like you roll it up around one of these little elements and it's just like ready to just explode and just pop out. It's too strong. But I had a bunch of that stuff laying around that I'd gotten on the cheap to play with, maybe making a barrel with. And you can cut it with some strong scissors. I mean, it'll wreck the scissors after a while, but you can cut it with some strong scissors and turn those into waterhouse apertures. So, or you can use.
What do you are you drilling the aperture with a drill bit?
Yeah. Okay. Which became problematic, I discovered. Like I'm learning as I go. I know absolutely nothing about anything. You know, with the larger apertures, it tears through more than it cuts a clean circle, and then you have to use a file to sort of clean it up, if you can clean it up, if you can get a good cut.
How thick of carbon fiber are we talking here?
Like 1/4 millimeter, like super thin, like single, which also leaks light for the nerds out there. So once you get it and you cut it down, you have to like take black. I just use black rattle can, matte rattle can, paint the back, the more porous back, and it fills in all the pores that would leak light, and then like 1 or 2 coats of clear coat of that to seal that in place. And it eventually wears through, right? Because as you're taking it in and out of the lens, it's like wearing through the acrylic clear coat, and it's wearing through the paint. So depending on how much you shoot, every couple of years or every 3 months, you have to do another coat on the back. And if you use file paper, black file folders also have it's like a thicker paper than standard printer paper. That works really well for waterhouse apertures too, and also for lens barrels. You just go to Office Depot and just buy like 5 or 6 black file folders, and they work great.
And the point being that the thinner it is, the less diffraction you have at a given.
Right, exactly.
So I learned a aerial trick from my friend Joe Van Cleve, who has a channel. Also shopping in the Walmart and Staples stationery aisles for black cardstock. Occasionally they make these 3-ring binders out of ABS black plastic. It's like they're about $1 a piece, and you can get like 1 million apertures. Or I've been building like aperture blades out of them. Shutter blades didn't. They're pretty nice, pretty not see through at all.
Right.
They're smooth, so when they fly, they don't. It's kind of hard to find like the same quality binder to cut up every time at Walmart.
Yeah. For this stuff, I end up finding a source and just like sticking with it. You know, like the adhesive-backed, camera repair light-proofing foam. There's a little brand called Japanese Hobby, I believe it is, and they make this in like 3 different thicknesses. Sadly, I end up going to Amazon for it or eBay. Fuck Amazon, but some things I just can't get anywhere else. Right. And this stuff is great. I use it everywhere. I use it to hold the lenses and the elements in place. I use it to make light seals for other lenses. I use it. I've never actually used it in a camera, but what can I say? But it's really, really handy. I used it to seal up the box camera I made at the start of the pandemic, to seal up the slide on the inside to make sure that didn't leak light. Used a lot of it for that, but that's a really handy material. And the adhesive back part is nice because that way you don't have to deal with gluing it. You just peel off the paper and put it on, and away you go. Yeah.
All right. So let's step back to this is what I was talking about. I kind of wanted to head the conversation to where, if somebody was at home and they wanted to start playing around with lenses and making their own lenses, and say it's Matt Murray in sunny Brisbane, Australia.
What's up, Matt?
So, and Fred can't really get him I think Fred does ship internationally.
He does.
But so surplus shed, but let's just say, he's out of something. So where would you go to find lens elements to make?
I will often go to, if Fred doesn't have something in particular, a lot of the manufacturers like Thor Labs and Edmund, like a lot of those places sell, they're discontinued, they sell their scratch, they sell their discount. So if there's something really particular I'm looking for, I'll hunt around through there to see if they have something interesting. Okay. I haven't gotten anything from them yet, but I've come really, really close. So I'll actually peruse the manufacturers to see if they have any discounted stock, or essentially, what in the motorcycle world we would call scratch and dent. Fully functional, it just isn't very pretty anymore. It's got something that makes it, you can't sell it at retail. I peruse them. I've found an increasing number of achromats and some other types of lens elements actually on eBay. There's a whole world out there that I had no idea existed around making telescopes. There's this huge cottage industry around hand making telescopes of various using lenses, and they use really high quality glass.
I got another one is if you're looking for telescope optics, AliExpress is pretty good. Yeah,
I tried certain places. I try to avoid some places. AliExpress, though, the Amazon of China, but Amazon, you can find some stuff on Amazon, AliExpress, eBay. You can take apart, which I know you're starting to do, Graham. You can take apart pre-existing shit lenses that may have like a damaged front element. I will often, I have one camera I'm shooting with now, which is an old, it's an old Voigtlander folder, an Avis plate camera, which had I put a lens and a shutter on it from a different camera of the same ilk that functions, which had a bad bellows, but it had a bad front element. Right. So I just took another element that was about the same diameter, roughly the same diameter, which fortunately was close to the same focal length, and put that in there. And it's roughly the same focal length still as the stock one, but is a completely different lens. And that's what I'm shooting the American Yard Car project with, just because it was interesting. It's a cute little camera. It's super lightweight. It's still large format. It's essentially still a 325 by 425, and it's like a quarter the weight of the Graflex, and a quarter the size of the Graflex. Like the little folder, exactly like that little folder right there.
So Nick is holding up. What are you holding up specifically, Nick? Unmute yourself. And
that is a Voigtlander Avis.
Okay.
That's exactly the camera he's describing.
Yep.
And it is a wonderful, wonderful, like all Voigtlander.
Yeah, they're great.
Let's see how small it gets.
Yeah, it's tiny. You can't quite put it in your pocket, but they would have called this a pocket camera back in the day.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hold it next to my head.
But your head is ginormous, to be clear.
So it is the size of.
I mean, my hands aren't that big.
Yeah.
It's small. It's a real plate camera.
Yeah. So it would be the size of, boy, I'm trying to think of something that would be universal.
A
4
small
packs
book.
of cigarettes.
A small book. A moderate sized paper back, basically.
Yeah. It's a little bit thicker. It would be, a Stephen King book as opposed
Right.
to.
It's actually smaller than a standard paperback, but thicker.
Yeah.
I would say.
But
one of the things is it has a double bellows extension, so it can take seriously long lens and focus really close. And
yeah.
It has a ground glass back. It has as well as a viewfinder. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, they're cute. They're highly functional.
And its standard lens is a 135, which that's a normal on this camera. Let's see.
But you could easily go back like to a 105, like no problem.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyway.
Yeah. And so, but the more to the point is, if you want to make an interesting lens, you could also take like a inexpensive vintage camera like that has just a lot of those have really like a front element gets particularly scratched up really easily. And they're usually a 2-element lens, and just unscrew that front, measure the diameter, find an interesting piece of glass from somewhere, and slap that sucker in there, and you've got a really interesting lens that is essentially a modified stock one, but that you've made. Like it's different than what anybody else will do with that. You've made a lens, right? Like you don't have to make it from scratch. You can take an existing lens and screw with it. And those like late 1800 lenses that come with a shutter can be had fairly affordably. Have usually a diameter about the same as Fred usually gets. They're not massive chunks of glass because they're made for like 6x9 or 9x12. And you can just use one of those as your vehicle, and away you go. And they make really fun and beautiful lenses because like they're often brass. They've got this really beautiful tooling. They're really, really cool. I shot a project in Oklahoma just before the pandemic with a lens like that, and it was super fun.
And they've got a shutter.
And they have a shutter,
which helps quite a bit. So one of the things I am now more than 2 weeks from my second COVID shot, and so I'm slowly re-emerging into the world. And my wife and I went to an antique store that was closing out. And one of the things that was in the antique store was a Canon AE1. I held it up a little bit earlier.
Classic.
Now, this is my first Canon AE1. I've never had it. I've had tons. So I'm film testing it right now. And I really expect to just flip it on eBay. That was the idea. But it came with 2 zoom lenses, so or two longer lenses. It came with a 1.8 or whatever.
Yeah, the standard 35 millimeter fair. Yeah, like a 35-1.8. Yeah.
So it also came with a 135
2.8
3.5 Canon FD, which is about $35 on eBay, and it came with a Quanta-Ray zoom. And as I was destroying the Quanta-Ray zoom, I think it actually might have been a Minolta mount. It said MC on it. I don't think that's a Canon mount, but so I took this lens apart because when I looked on eBay, it had no value. I'm not going to use a zoom lens. I don't use zoom lenses. So I took it apart and ended up with a bag of lens elements. Now, these are the smaller lens elements, and I'll show you the bigger ones. But I just came up with 8 lens elements that were, that range in type. That's one of the things that's nice. So there are 3 different ways a lens can be. It can be planar, which is flat. It can be convex, which means it bulges out, and it can be concave, which means it bulges in. And then you multiply that by the other side of the lens having all of those options as well. And so there are a bunch of different lens types. I have some lens elements in here that are double concave, some that are double convex.
Dude, can I just stop you for a second and say, why in the world do you have those all in a bag banging on each other, getting scratched up? Sir, no sir. bad Graham. You're going to make a lens out of those. Those are all really high quality pieces of glass. Do not let them bang together and get all fucked up and scratched up like that.
Okay, so
That's how you get good tones.
If I want a sharp image and a nice unblemished image, I'll just take one of my cameras out.
Yes, but if I may say so, if you take two really sharp, gorgeous pieces of glass that aren't optically like Jason Lane style put together to make the maximum image all the way around, right? They're still gonna make a crazy. They're still gonna make a crazy image, right?
Okay.
But then you take these two pieces of glass and you beat the fuck out of them. They're gonna make a crazy shitty image. You're already taking a bunch of stuff that's not meant to be used together, putting together to make an image, and it's going to make what most people consider a suboptimal image, right? But there still needs to be something there that's sharp to hold on to.
Now we're getting into a subjective territory.
We are, right? But that's okay. But if you take them and you scratch them the fuck up, you're just going to get a mess. I see this all the time with people who shoot. Oh, stop it! People who shoot like colliding and dry plate, and they have these old brass lenses.
Yeah.
That have a ton of character, and they're just the front element is just they don't clean them down, up, and like there's a difference to me between like controlled chaos. There's a photographer that I sadly passed away before I knew he existed, so I never got a chance to meet him. James Fee, look him up, look him the hell up. Okay, he'll produce images, especially you, Graham, that'll blow your damn mind. Like
say his name again.
He was James Fee, F-E-E.
Okay.
And he messed with his lenses. He did macro tubes. He used old lenses on his media format, and he shot just ridiculous work. But he was also super OCD in the darkroom. He's like one of the last American darkroom masters with his prints and his developing. But he would purposely do things to mess with his stuff. Like he purposely messed with the lenses, but he was purposeful. He would purposely, like with his 120 reels, he wouldn't really wash his reels super well because he would want to have some remnant chemicals on them for the next roll. And so you'll see some of the stuff will have these weird chemical dots because he still had a little bit of fixer on his reel.
This is the concept of not washing the cast iron pan.
Right, exactly. But he did it in a very purposeful manner. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't always know exactly what the outcome was going to be. Like he didn't know, like, okay, the fixer is going to hit this frame right here, whatever. But he did it with purpose. And for me, what that really introduced.
We want to see Graham hunched over a lens with a loop and a tiny little piece of sandpaper on the
sticking around it. Yeah.
Scratching it just how he wants it.
Just how he wants it, exactly. But more to the point, though, was being very purposeful and cognizant about what kind of chaos you're adding to your mix. And the chaos may be a little bit random, but it's something that you can quantify and expect to have happen, right? So that you don't go out and make a huge effort. And again, this is maybe a difference between you and I, right? Like when I shoot, I'm shooting and I'm thinking an effort and I have something in mind and I'm not fucking around.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't want to come back and have that shot ruined by something that I didn't know was going to happen.
So it has to do with reproducibility. Yes. When you control it, you can reproduce it.
Right. And also always having something sharp to hold on to. Like a lens, a handmade lens is never going to be as sharp as a commercial lens. Let's just be, unless you're Jason Lane.
That's not what we want.
Or an optical engineer. You're never going to get those results. Let's just get that out of the way. You know, but for me, at least, subjectively, I always want to have something sharp in there for your eye to hold on to. Because otherwise, and again, this is subjective, but for me, like there's just needs to be something that's tack sharp to anchor your eye.
Yeah. There has to be a something. There has to be a something in order to provide the contrast for the nothing. Is another way of saying that, or
so it's like in the old days before we had GPS, we used to do something called dead reckoning. Yeah. And if in dead reckoning, if you didn't get everything as right as you could, you might end up, wrong harbor or hitting the wrong island. You needed to narrow all the errors down to get you in the ballpark.
Exactly.
Because once you have more than one variable, things get really fast.
Right. Yeah.
And GPS is entirely a matter of cheating. There are plenty of variables, but someone else paid the bills on those.
Yeah, and
it's
I guess
oh, go ahead.
I guess my point for you, Graham, with those lenses sticking around in there, right? Like before you damage them, before you introduce that chaos, see what they're capable of as they are. And then once you see that, you're like, okay, this is cool, but I could do something a little crazy, and then you can with it. But if you just wantonly destroy them before you can even see what they'll do, it's like an image scan or a piece of film, right? Like once it's degrades, you'll never get it back.
Okay, so that actually leads me to my next step, because I took 8 elements out of this Quantaray Zoom, and I don't know jack about any of them, right? Okay, so I only know what their shapes are.
Cool.
So the front element was a convex planar. So it was planar. It was flat on the back, convex on the front, and it's the big front element that everybody looks at. One of the things that I know about this, by the way, as opposed to generally buying lenses from Surplus Shed, is it's coated. It's multi-coated, right? So it can handle, and the elements in between are all going to be coated to keep that refraction down and the reflection and all, So what I did was I made a 3D printed glorified paper towel tube. And what this is for the people at home, this is a cylinder. It's 60 millimeters across, because I figured I'm not going to pull out any elements that are wider than 60 millimeters across. Excuse me. It has a split down one side of the tube. And then on the back, I have some ground glass. In fact, Ethan, I don't know if you recognize this particular piece of ground glass. That was my ground glass focusing confirmation device for my Bronco pen that Ethan sent out to everybody. But you can just get frosted plexi, which is what I have on the back. Or you can just do frosted tape on the back. That'll work as well. And then I have made these things that are kind of like, think about a magnifying glass, but the handle is very short. Well, that sticks up and out from the tube, and I can, and I'm doing it right now, I can focus.
Ethan?
Okay, so I can get the focal length.
Weren't we talking about optical benches?
Yeah, this is my optical bench that I made, drew up on 3D.
Your optical tube.
My optical tube, and it works. Well, but here's part of the deal is that, so I know this is about a 90 or 95, because this is 120 millimeters long and where it focuses at infinity. But then I've made a bunch of these, so I can put 2 of them in there, and then I can figure out where my pairs focus. And here, let me focus in on that device. And there I am, right there. Here, let's see, over my shoulder. See, I can slide them in and out. I can slide them in and out, and I can figure out what pairs will be in focus at what point. So this is, now I did it with 3D printing, but I think that this is something that generally you can do with
PVC pipe.
With PVC pipe, perfect, or a toilet paper tube or anything. So my whole point on this is to lower the cost, lower the barriers.
Right.
And these are things that not only, you're talking, this one. This is a Sears 80 to 200 lens for the OM system. I looked this up on eBay before we went on, and this thing is worth $12.99 including shipping. You
Right.
can have one of these right now.
Mhm.
So you're not, and if you guys are camera hoarders, this is
Nobody
you've
here is
got
a camera
ton
hoarder.
of these things. Okay,
Nick is
so
for sure not a camera hoarder.
so my whole point is you can start playing around, and then I'm going to show you another one. And this is this actually many of you guys know Dominic Silverthorne. We're going to Dominic Silverthorne, PH Dom on Flickr. He's Cops Works on Instagram. He's also Lens Punk on Instagram.
Yep.
And he's doing a lot of these things, which are essentially body caps with, now here, I'm going to also hold up another camera, is a broken point and shoot. They have very short focal lens to body focal lengths, right? So this is one. It is a shaft that is sitting in a Fuji 2 M39 adapter. And it's a shaft that I have wrapped felt around. And it's this is an achromat pair. I forget what exactly. I think they're about 50s. And I'm going to put it on my webcam. And now,
Yeah, that looks super interesting.
Okay, so I can focus it essentially the same way you would focus a lens baby. So you can tilt it a bit. There's enough play in the system. You can tilt it a bit. I'm just pushing it in and out, and it's staying in there.
Yeah, I see that. It's guaranteed all bokeh all the time.
You bet.
There we go. There's the bokeh.
Bokeh.
Yeah.
Oka, bokeh, tomato.
Yeah, exactly. So that is
Living la vida boca.
exactly. So I can get fairly sharp images. Now there's tons of haze because they're uncoated lenses. So I just increase the contrast because it's also very low contrast, right?
I feel like I'm in a dream, a fever dream.
Yeah, and this is just working with on a Fuji X Pan. One of the great things about this is it's the shutter that is a problem with some of these.
Yep.
And it has the shutter built in.
Right.
So these, this is part of my little rant, and it's your fault, Erik. This is your fault. Okay.
Sorry,
but part of my little rant is go out and experiment with these things. One of the things that I know is no one can take a picture that will look like what you take with your dollar bill lens, because they're not going to find the same elements. They're not going to space them exactly the same way. Their Waterhouse stops are going to be cut more ragged. This is the breaking of the cookie cutter, right?
Okay.
This is the smashing of the cookie cutter. And this is, okay, so I'm overtaking this, our guest right now. And
no, dude, I'm enjoying this. This is great.
So
I'm usually the one ranting, so, fire in the hole, man.
Yeah. So, Erik, are you working from home right now?
Yeah.
You? Okay. So I've been working from home. I teach college, and I teach web design and graphic design. So I've been sitting in this goddamn chair, which is a nice chair. It's a nice chair.
It's well formed to
sitting in this room for a year, just like everybody else. Or everybody else has been lucky enough to have the option of not going to a physical walk. I mean, I don't want to complain about my fortune, my good fortune.
Fair.
But my God, right about Christmas time, I bought a beautiful Chamonix 4x5, and
nice.
I love this camera, and I've used it 5 times because there's nothing. Nick, who was the ass bucket comment about?
Talking about chairs being perfectly formed to your butt after sitting it for a year.
So, but the thing is that I have nothing I want to take a picture of because I've already taken a picture of it. So that's what this has done, because I've taken a picture of this, but I've not taken a picture of that. And this is something. I want to also give a shout out to the Future of Photography. They had an episode about a month and a half ago on abstract photography. Abstract. And they were talking about how you would do it and all this different. I love that concept. Non-objective photography or low objective photography. So I'm going to say part of the deal, one of the reasons why I'm ranting right now is this has unstuck me from about a year of being stuck photographically.
Great.
And it allows me to go in the backyard and take pictures that I've never taken before. And of the things that I've taken 100 pictures of.
Right.
And this is a way to explore without having to get a ticket to go somewhere. It's Nick just said, take a listen to the Classic Lenses podcast with Isabella Curtis. Great episode.
They knocked that one out.
Great episode. But anyway, I encourage people to search out. I want to give a shout out again to Dom, and it is lens_punk. I think it is lens_punk on Instagram. Take a look at what he's doing with body caps and cheap lenses, and let's get a body of work out there.
And he's an interesting case in that like his day job is high-end, high-quality woodworking,
right?
Furniture, building stuff. Like he's in Japan, where they are very, very into high quality. Like you don't, for that sort of trade, you don't sort of half-ass it.
Right.
And he used to also make large format cameras, extend that sort of woodworking into large format cameras. And we chatted a little bit by email. We'll keep talking. And he said, I like simplifying this to just like playing around with lens elements instead of building cameras was an eye opener for me, because I enjoyed building the cameras, but making these lenses, this simple sort of punk rock ethos, really liberated. And it's a bit of anti-establishment. It's a bit of FU to high dollar stuff. And I think maybe even to a certain extent, it gets interesting too, because you look at like the inexpensive lomography lenses, the lens babies, that sort of stuff. They're less than $100. They're really cheap. You can get some amazing results with the lens babies. There's a photographer in Germany, DSLs, that I follow, who just gets ridiculously great results with his lens babies. Like, damn son, that's nice. That starts to border on how cheap that you or I or Nick or Ethan could make a lens with two $5 elements from Social Said plus something for a barrel. You spent $15, $20 per se to make a lens. You can buy a lens baby for $40. Like they are managing to make really interesting. My point, really interesting lo-fi. I'm air quoting that because that's sort of the term. Lenses for commercially affordable. So if you, for the people who are watching or listening out there, if you want to do this sort of thing, but like, I don't know about making my own, you can also get some really interesting results with many, many different lens mounts from something like a Lens Baby or a Lomo. And I have to give a shout out to that crew, because they've been going after this sort of thing for a long time. They've stuck the course.
Absolutely.
They've made a venture out of that, employs a lot of people gainfully. And I think that's
got a lot of people into shooting on film, which keeps us in our film habit.
Major hats off to it. Also, just on a side note. Go ahead. No, you.
Oh, just so the one thing to think about with that is Lens Baby is a really fast way to learn what's going on with.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if you want to jump up to a bigger sensor or a bigger piece of film, and you don't feel like struggling with incremental changes in a camera, then it's where you end up basically making your own.
Yeah.
And Isabel Curtis is actually working on that right now. He's done everything from the best lenses ever made to using a Lens Baby, all of her pictures. Doesn't matter which piece of equipment she's using. But right now, the solution she's trying to solve is to get that effect on a bigger sensor, and commercial stuff doesn't provide.
Yeah.
And what camera does she shoot with it? What camera is it?
She's switched from film recently to shooting with the GFX 50R from Fuji, which has a slightly bigger sensor. I need to go into talk about what that change in format does, but I'm not going to do it today because it's a long discussion.
Yeah. I mean, I've shot my handmade, like these are for a little while. Unfortunately, he's out of stock. I have to email him to see if he's going to get them back in stock. But for a while, Fred was making these. They're telescope eyepieces with threaded in lens element adapters. Like they're just long enough to take 3 of them. So essentially, you can put in 2 lenses and have one in the middle to space them out. And they take, again, I discovered the world of telescopes, right? This thread is a 42 T mount, so it's a slightly different thread than your standard M42. Okay. But there are people making an M42 to T2 adapter, which means for a while I have a bunch of these. I started playing with, and you sort of have to mess around with them to get the lens element in the back, which makes a difference.
Gotta love the tape.
Right. Tape and foam. There's also a million M42 focusing helicoids out there for super cheap. So like when I was fortunate enough to get loaned one of those GFX 50s, handmade lens on a helicoid, fairly inexpensive, shoots fucking great on that sensor. That is literally, I'm going to rave about it for a second. That Fuji GFX 50 is the only digital sensor I want. Like flat out, it shoots so well converted to monochrome with a handmade lens. It's the only one that I've shot where it's like, okay, this looks almost exactly like the type of thing I can get from my Pentacon 6 and like a really smooth film. And sometimes I don't want the smooth film, to be clear, and I'd rather shoot a 400 and get a little chunk or like.
But then you get the frames to overlap.
Yeah, and also you can get the frames to overlap and get super funky.
It's a super great tool for experimentation. And
exactly.
It speeds up the learning process. Even if you're then going to use film, you can go through a whole bunch of iterations really quickly. And then waste a lot less time and chemicals.
Right. And what you can do is, because there's so many adapters for old lenses to that body, is you buy yourself a medium format bellows. The Pentacon 6 bellows, macro bellows, are huge in diameter. I have one out in the garage. They're huge in diameter and they have a massive extension. And there's a Pentacon to Fuji GFX adapter, right? So you can get that on there, and it gives you this huge bellows length to test different lens elements, test different lenses with on that sensor, right? And it works really, 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 really well for just testing all sorts of stuff. And you can, I mean, I focused a bunch with just the bellows focus as my focus throw before I started doing these. But man, a bellows and that medium format sensor allows you to test and do a lot of interesting things.
One other thing
in any conditions, like middle of the night or whatever, like you're not limited to.
Well, one of the things that's nice about that size sensor, and one of the things that Isabella was talking about when she was talking about it, is you can also free lens. And free lensing is just unscrewing your lens and just moving it around.
Have you guys ever seen Susan Bernstein's work?
No.
She is a photographer based down in LA, and for a while now, well over 10 years, maybe 20 years, she's been hand making her own cameras and lenses using plastic elements, all sorts of stuff. Her work is stellar, gorgeous, stunning. Like Susan Bernstein's work is phenomenal. And she's actually got a certain level of commercial success doing it, which is difficult, right? Using this sort of lo-fi crazy method. But she's really, really good. We have a few friends in common who just really speak highly of her as a person, and also obviously as a photographer.
And she has some Getty Images stuff, and she is, let me make sure this is the right Susan Bernstein. This is not, okay. I just about gave out somebody else's. Maybe we're getting.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat to make sure you got the right one.
Yeah, put it in the chat there.
Let's see.
And here, let me get my chat open.
Chat. Where is the chat? I rarely use.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
While you're working on that, you guys have mentioned two things that might be worth going into, just specifying what you're talking about. T-mount was for telescopes.
Yep.
And there are lenses, and we also mentioned Quantarray. So here's a $10 400 millimeter lens in T-mount. And one thing about T-mount is it was the longest of all the 35 millimeter flange back distances, pretty much. And that means you can adapt T-mount to any other 5 millimeter. It's a threaded mount. You can screw on like a Nikon.
Yeah, it's an M42 by 0.75.
Right.
Thread.
And here's what's different about this Quantarray lens. It's probably been used once. It's perfect. It's mint. The reason it's only been used once is that if you try and shoot color with it, it's all magenta flare and hardly any image. But if you shoot monochrome, it's absolutely perfectly fine. And the other thing about a lens this cheap is that it weighs just about 1.5 pounds. So for a 400 millimeter lens, that's an amazing thing. And with a modern camera that can shoot at a 4,000th of a second or higher, you can handhold a 400 millimeter. So it's kind of an amazing.
So Nick,
piece of
have you ever
for $10?
Yeah.
Have you ever made those like crescent rolls that come in a tube and you whack them on the side of the counter and then they open up? That's what you need to do with that lens to get those elements out. Oh,
you're talking about lens butchery in order to use the glass. Well, that was kind of one of the things I was thinking when I bought it, but then it turned out to be kind of a wonderful thing. Another thing about these, because they're meant to be adapted to everything under the sun, is they have an aperture stop-down device. So they work on any camera. They're really kind of cool that way.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to be very clear, Susan Bernstein is Burnstine. I did the EIN and was getting some other people. SusanBernstein.com. Yes, this is 100% of what I want to do with my current work. So
yeah.
One other thing I want to mention, I talked a little bit about it. I wanted to show a working version. And that is Aperture. We talked about Waterhouse stops. This is in fact the 58 millimeter or 54 millimeter. This is 2 105 achromat pairs on either end. And
you use the spaghetti trick.
What? Say it again.
Did you use the spaghetti sizing trick? Hold on, go ahead, finish it. Finish it.
But they're spaced in between by an aperture that I bought for $25 on AliExpress. So this is a 54 1.4, and I'm going to put it on this APS-C sensor that my webcam is running off of, and free lens, and I might not be, where is it? Where am I? I was trying to, here, I had it wide open. Let me.
That's a flattering lens. That's a really flattering.
Yeah,
lens.
yeah. Screw you, Nick. For some reason, I'm not. I think it needs to go inside of the flange is too long on this one. But it is. I made that for my K-mount SLR, my Vivitar, and all I do is I put it together like that, and then I have aperture control. I'm essentially free lensing because it won't stay in there. It'll fall out. Right. But it has aperture control, which is really nice. And I was, one thing about this is I was metering using the camera's meter, which didn't work because it was trying to read the f-stop. So off the lens, which there's none of that communication in it. But I'm going to rework this one so it'll mount on that.
I asked, there was something mentioned a little bit ago. There's some reference to a spaghetti trick.
Yeah. What's that?
What this
so
is?
There is. So there is a really inexpensive. I'm trying to find a good link for it, but sadly it's going to be an Amazon link. I apologize in advance. So there is, in terms of like apertures, right, like an integrated, multi-blade aperture. One interesting place one can get them is they use them for pasta portion sizing.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, they're big-ish, but there they are. I mean, you want to get one that isn't like translucent lime green or whatever. But if in terms of, and also they tend to be maybe a little bit bigger because like how big of a thing of pasta am I making for my family? But nonetheless.
Honey, how much pasta should I put in?
Exactly.
About F4.
That's about an F2.8. But that
actually makes a lot of sense because in the dark winter months you need more pasta.
So much pasta. Dude, yeah. But more to the point, like I found that to be a really interesting place to find. I haven't used one yet. I'm really tempted, but to find like interesting sources of photographic equipment, like a pasta sizer. Like there's all sorts of interesting places where you can find the stuff that works.
Turn your mic off, Ethan.
I mean, I don't mind listening to a drill, honestly.
Sorry.
I feel like I'm in a dentist's office.
I think a pasta sizer would be more appropriate for some sort of late night exercise machine.
Yeah.
Get the pasta sizer.
But for a bigger piece of glass, like a lens like this size, there are a lot of interesting places to possibly find things like apertures, or like
Hey, let's talk about that lens. Let's talk about specifically the construction, let's talk about which pieces of glass you used,
right?
How you're putting it together, and talk about the whole thing about it being a dual format, a dual focal length.
A convertible. Well, it was
Actually, can we retell the story? I know we've talked about it a few times as we lead into it. Why are you building this lens like this? Or
yeah, because I feel like there's a good chance that the camera this is being built for. I'm missing a piece. 1 second. There you are. So this is a lens that's being built for not me. It's a commissioned piece, which is weird to say. I actually have a commissioned lens. Like the fuck is happening to the world? If somebody wants to commission a lens from me and not like Jason, but hey, whatever. By a photographer named Elena Eritrim, and she's originally from the Bronx. She's African American, Black, and really look her up. Like her portrait photography is stunning. Very masters painterly because she drew a lot of inspiration from the masters of painting, and her work is just really gorgeous. She also happens to be the partner like life partner, if you will, of Wayne Martin Belger. So I didn't meet her when I met Wayne, but I think they became a couple after I met Wayne. So she was visiting family. She and some of her family were on a vacation, and they said, "Hey," her mom said, "Hey, you have some aunties, some great aunts further in, I think it's South Carolina. Would you like to go meet them?" And she's like, "Yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to." So they go to meet these two great aunts of hers, and it turns out they are living on former plantation land that her great grandfather, I believe, I have to double check my notes, was born on as a slave, enslaved. Um, and when that plantation owner died, he had lots of children with his slaves, and he ceded a bunch of the land to his ancestors from those acts, right? And those include her ancestors, who are now amongst them her great aunties, and to take the story a step further, it turns out when she dug into this great grandfather, he had fallen in love with a young lady literally across the street at the plantation across the street, who was the plantation owner's daughter. They fell in love and they ran away up to Maine or Pennsylvania and started that side of her family. It's her mother's side of the family. And so she has this really like mind-blowing moment of both sides, like this side of the family were both slave owners and slaves. Like, holy shit. You know, and this is post George Floyd. This is like part of America's great racial reckoning that's been happening. And so she's having this moment of like, what do I do with this? So, and some of the cabins still exist, like those cabins that the slaves lived in, were born in, died in, built. They're still there. So she wants to go back and do oral histories and take portraits and do landscapes of these properties and sort of explore her own history, but also sort of America's racial history a lot more. And eventually she actually wants to purchase the land where two of those cabins that are still intact are still on. So Wayne, we had Wayne on a large format podcast, and we were talking a little about this. And he's going to build a camera for her. It'll be his first like real camera that Wayne will have ever built with an actual lens, not a pinhole. If you've ever seen Wayne's lenses, Wayne's cameras, sorry, they're absolutely bonkers. They're very bespoke per project. And he's going to build it at least partially with wood reclaimed from those cabins, right? Because that's just what Wayne does, you know. And he just sort of off the cuff said, "Hey, man, I was meaning to ask you, would you build a lens for it?" And I was like yes. And I think that must have been like 6 months ago or so now, or 5 months ago or so now, which is really intimidating, if I can be honest for a moment. You know, I don't really feel like I'm some sort of really great or amazing lens builder. Sorry, my coffee machine's turning off. Or anybody who's like really accomplished or should be intensely sought after to build
I saw
something.
some videos of this lens. It's pretty good. I mean, yeah.
You rose to the occasion.
You are
absolutely.
more competent than you are confident.
Well, you're very kind. So I decided, okay, 8x10. I need a big chunk of glass. I'd made this lens at the start of the pandemic for a box camera, and I thought, okay, this will probably give me some 8x10 coverage. And I contacted Fred to see if any more of those elements, and he didn't. But he said, "Hey, but I have a couple of uncemented acromats that have the same focal length, 360s for the folks in the audience, but a little bit bigger, you know, a couple millimeters bigger diameter. Do you want them?" And I said, "And they're coated." And I said, "Hell yes. Where are they?" He's like, "Oh, they're not in stock. I just have them. They're not in the catalog. Do you want them?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, I will put them up. Here's the part number. They're just for you. Same price, you know, like $4.50 each, you know." And I was like, yes, yes. And I get them, and there's these massive, just massive pieces of coated, uncemented acromats. They just jive. And you can see there's a little bit of scoring on it. Like they've been used. They came out of something. I believe they came out of like some high-end military binoculars. but they're just massive chunks of glass. And I thought, okay, I have 2 pieces of glass. I don't want her to be limited to like a 180, which is a fairly wide angle, right, for a 4x5. That's like a 24 millimeter. That's a terrible landscape.
You mean for 8x10? You mean for 8x10?
Yeah, for 8x10. Like it's a really wide angle for an 8x10. So I decided I would go ahead and I'd take a crack at making a convertible lens, which were very much an invention of the late 1800s. They're kind of out of favor nowadays because for the most part, you just get a much better lens if it's all dedicated and put together to be what it is, right? When you make a lens that can convert from one thing to the other, you start to make a lot of compromises in either form, and that's just the way it is. But for me, this making lenses is a compromise no matter what. So, and I've made a few lenses like this where they have sort of a middle piece and the aperture drop-in. In this particular case, it has both an aperture drop-in and a shutter, a drop shutter. So I'm fairly comfortable with this design. But I also wanted to make it look good because it's going to be on a Wayne Martin Belger camera and it's got to hang, right? Like Wayne's cameras are, again, pieces of art. And I wanted to make it with materials that had something to do with her project. Like it didn't feel right to me to slap like this lens, the barrels are made out of PVC pipe, right? It just it feels bad, man. It felt bad to go and like make a lens for such a weighty project and use this fucking, we can swear, just use some piece of shit PVC pipe. It just didn't feel right, you know? So I decided, I've never really worked with wood before, so I decided to try my hand at essentially turning wood lenses, wood barrels, I should say. Right? This is, you'll see what this is for later, but essentially it's a wooden round. And it's made from, well, this particular wood is a hardwood from Mississippi called Mississippi red gum. It's indigenous to the American South. More than likely, her ancestors lived in cabins made from this wood, or sat on chairs made of this wood, or cut down this stuff and processed it and burned it and did whatever else. Like this was part of their lives. And it's also sustainable. It's not it's like, there's some really gorgeous wood out there I've discovered, but like you look into where it comes from and how it's harvested, and it's like, this is sketchy and terrible. There's a lot of beautiful wood from Africa that is just heinous from an environmental and like workers' rights standpoint. It's just garbage. That's so bad, but it's beautiful. Don't get me wrong. I really wanted to use it, but I'm like, I can't. So it's a sustainable wood. Actually, Bentley is starting to use this wood for their interiors, which is awesome. Yeah, very much oh my. So and my local lumber yard carries planks of it. So I grabbed a plank of it and just taught myself how to work with wood, cut the rounds. These didn't come round to start with. Essentially, I started with little squares and taught myself how to round them out without a lathe. I just only have a drill press. Taught myself how to finish everything else. I ended up using carbon fiber for the lens boards themselves because it has to be really, really thin and really, really strong. This is not a light little beastie. And then they're held in with just circlips. Honda engine circlips from ATVs. Like I said, you scramble, because circlips like this, inner circlips like this, are super expensive. Like they're really expensive. They're $8 to $12 a freaking pop. Honda ATV circlips, couple bucks.
You know, part of this process that I love is how we discover that what we need is out there, but it's just used for something else.
Yeah, and my first crack at these circlips, I got like the 58 millimeter circlip that was for this diameter, but they're too strong. Like I don't have much of a lip here to work with, which was a mistake on my part. I should have had more of a lip here. I barely have any lip. That's a total rookie mistake on my part, but I wasn't going to rebuild these barrels at that point. So I was like, screw it. I'm working with what I got. But their unsprung circlip for 58 is like 65 or 68 millimeters because they're made for inside of an engine. So getting them like compressed enough to get in there, it just wasn't possible. So I went for, I think these are 55 or 54 millimeter circlips with an unsprung diameter of like just 2 or 3 millimeters wider than this. They have an unsprung diameter, so I just had to barely wedge them in there and let them go, and they stuck. Because again, they're made for an engine. They're going to sit here static. You don't need the same tolerances, right? Yes, circlip pliers. And then the other thing, because this is my classic lens design, 2 acromats facing each other. But essentially, and also the reason I also chose these designs is the 2 predominant lens designs in the 1800s were the Chevalier, which is more commonly known as the French landscape lens. It's a single achromat that was originally developed for telescopes. Charles Chevalier was an optometrist, doctorate. Back then, like that meant something. It wasn't just the guy who did your glasses. Like he did glasses for the ultra rich, but he also did telegraph, telescope lenses, scientific lenses, all sorts of stuff. So his original camera lens was made for telescopes, and the daguerreotypes came out, and he saw them, was fascinated, and thought, I just built a lens for this for telescopes. I wonder if it'll work for this daguerreotype thing, and it worked great, and that became the first mass-produced camera lens, the French landscape, the Chevalier. Which is also interesting because it places the aperture in front of the lens. Modern photography, we always think of the aperture as in between the lens elements. The Chevalier has it in front of it, which feels really weird. Honestly, I had my doubts. I was like, how the hell? No, it shoots amazingly well. So I wanted to do a French landscape, but the second most common lens back then was the Petzl, the 2-element Petzl.
So
Nick?
Before we run past it, so putting the aperture in front, does that basically mean it's sort of a pinhole camera enhanced by a lens?
That's an interesting way to look at it, possibly. I mean, it might possibly be. There's some math to where the optimal placement of the aperture is in front of the lens, depending on the focal length, which I'll get to in a second. Doesn't actually, at least for this build, didn't actually work, at least not for an 8x10. Like it actually took, like this thing has coverage for days. This thing will cover 16x20. Like if she has lens movements, like we tried on my buddy's 8x10, we threw it full tilt, full way, full up, everywhere. This thing covers everything. It's ridiculous how much coverage this glass has, right? Like shocking. So the optimal distance for the aperture is usually 1/6 to 1/7 the focal length, right? So for a 360 millimeter lens, you're looking at 50, 60 millimeters up front, right? 6 centimeters. So we did that. And
you're now talking about it. Are you still talking about the Chevalier?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And so we did that in my buddy's garden when we were testing the landscape side of it, and threw on, we're shooting paper negatives, and threw on one of the bigger apertures to start with, and got massive vignette, right? Massive vignette. And I was like, son of a bitch, this doesn't cover 8x10. Like this is one of the first things we shot, and I was like, fuck me, this doesn't work, right? This is bad, man. But then I ended up quickly sort of refactoring. I had a beautiful piece of brass, of copper. I had a copper barrel to slide over it to place the aperture at the right length. It was just gorgeous. It was beautiful. It didn't work. So I quickly refactored and just used the sort of plastic piece I had to hold the barrel and munged it, and I shot that.
So what's the difference?
It's much closer to the lens.
You move the aperture much closer to the lens.
Much closer to the lens. I halved it to like 1/3 or 1/4 of the focal length, and I got full coverage, and it was sharp. So I was like, cool.
For those people who are just listening and not watching the YouTube video, what Erik just showed is looks like a large format lens, right? It's not. You could fool me and tell me that was a Schneider from, the 70s for sure.
They did. No, you could not. They don't make them out of wood.
No, the image,
No,
not
you're talking
the
about the
lens.
Oh, the image. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah. No, this is not. This is not a random lens anymore.
Right.
Beautiful.
Actually, that test shot was this one. Sorry, this is the test shot to
Wild.
match the one that
So
was.
am I wrong, or is there still some vignetting?
Oh yeah.
On
Oh
each
yeah.
one?
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's because of the aperture in front configuration.
No, it's because these two optical elements, they weren't really made to work with each other like this, right? Like they don't bend the light into each other for a perfect image. This is where like physics and having a degree in this and lens coatings and like that and that quant array that Graham took apart with all the different disparate weird elements put together, like those are scientifically designed to make a perfect image at 24 by 35 millimeter. They're coated, their angles, everything is 100% scientifically designed to do just that. These two elements were probably, again, the front elements from telescopes or I think binoculars. They were not made to work together like this. They were not made to work alone.
Okay.
So they're always going to have some vignetting or nuts stuff, right?
Okay. So
Rewinding.
I'm confused. The Chevalier has one piece of glass in it, and the one you're holding up has two.
Yep.
Correct.
But that test shot was made with two. Okay, I'll step back. So I wanted to make two lenses for it, but I only had two pieces of glass. So I decided I would make it convertible. And what I did is
I got it. A convertible Chevalier.
It has brass inserts in the back. And very teeny tiny screws, which I'm sending her like 12 of, because these little fuckers are going to be really easy to lose. With low profile.
So it worked fine with a single element and the aperture in front. It was only when you added the second element and changed the focal length dramatically, right, that it caused a problem.
No, it was a single element with the aperture placed where scientifically it should have been. That gave me a massive vignette, and I had a panic moment where I'm like, I did everything right. The math is right. The aperture's right. Like on the ground glass without the barrel, it's right. But I put the barrel on, and it vignettes like crazy. Shit. But I shortened the aperture barrel up front, and it worked great. And then I went home and I sort of refactored everything. Let me take all four of these off. And then you can see the inside of the lens too. And that's where this and an air intake bridge from a high performance car. You find stuff where you can find it, lined with black felt. It slips over the front, silver to mark that, and then the aperture holder. And that's a French landscape.
So what he's taken is what looks like a PVC, not PVC, ABS
rubber.
plastic. Oh, it's rubber. Okay.
Yeah, it's for air hoses and high performance cars.
Oh. Yeah. Okay.
It looks like it's meant to transport sewage, though. I mean, that's
it's.
And then he slipped in. Now, is that an aperture? Is the wood the aperture, or is
this is the start of the aperture, right? So this is a spare lens round that I had that I was experimenting on, and it just makes a perfect aperture holder. So this is f9.
Okay.
This.
Now he's put a. Okay, so this is.
That's f11.
Okay, so in the end of the tube, he put a piece of wood that when it has nothing, that has a hole in it, and when it has nothing, it's f9.
Yep.
Then he put in another piece. Is that a piece of wood or is that metal?
No, it's plastic. You know what this is? Plastic. This is an insert. You know the desk, corporate desk. They have the little holes drilled in them.
Oh yeah. For the cords.
This is a little plastic insert that goes into those holes to make it look pretty.
Okay.
Hardware store. That's f11, and then I bought a bunch of rubber washers.
Okay.
Right, and used Nick, you're gonna freaking laugh your ass off at this. Used wood spade bits, right, because they have a sharp center and two small points on the outsides. To take those rubber washers and cut them out to be bigger washers. So this is
actually
F24.
That's a good choice for that. Yeah.
Yeah, because it holds still and just cuts a nice, clean, really, really, really clean hole. I've got a tiny one for them. There it is.
And they stay centered because they have a little guide point. Whereas if you try and use,
and that's so F11, F16, and you just sort of press the rubber washer in there, and you have F16.
So how thick are the rubber washers?
They're about 1 millimeter. They're relatively thin.
Not bad.
Yeah. And that's the French landscape, the 360 that shot, those. And we tested it with portraits. Unfortunately, f9.5, like you need a lot of light to shoot 3 ASA paper at f9.5. So it's a little bit dark, but that's wide open.
To make sure that desk device that's holding the aperture, if you check to make sure that's not part of the vignetting.
Yes. Yeah. That first one was shot wide open without the desktop thing. And when we moved it back, there's no vignetting. Yeah. So, and then the inside of it, there's a little piece of that foam to light-proof it. I used machine screws to pop through. This is epoxied to the carbon fiber to hold it in place originally, and then machine screws were just drilled through in there to really hold it in there.
So for those who are just listening, he's made a mustache out of foam.
Pretty much. Yep.
Like
on the bottom. Yeah, because the back of the other back essentially has a little holder for the Waterhouse apertures that slide in. So when this is put together.
So this has Waterhouse stops.
Yep.
In between the two elements, but it's also got a front.
Right. Depending on the configuration. Right. Because when they're placed together like this, they're about 185 millimeter two element lens. I was hoping to do more of a petzl lens where the rear element has space between the flint and the crown, but I didn't have enough room in the lens. So it's just 2 paired acromats. But then for those apertures, aluminum business card stock. You can buy these. You use them with lasers essentially to make little aluminum business cards. They're like 0.5 millimeter, 1/4 millimeter thick, blacked out, super thin aluminum, pretty stiff, right? And I cut them with the same spade bit, Nick, because a big drill bit will punch through this and it'll bow it out, right, with the force. But those little spade bits make just fast work out of these.
I don't have it here in my room, but I inherited from my grandfather an adjustable spade bit. Have you seen those?
Oh, yeah.
Design. It's an infinitely adjustable diameter, well within its range, where you just turn a knob.
And you bring them in. It has 1 blade or 2 blades, right? Yeah, exactly. I've been tempted by those. But that allows me, because the larger apertures are usually difficult with the drill bit, because getting a drill bit this big is difficult, and then punching it through something without buckling it is also difficult, and burring it. So this is just black aluminum business card stock, f8. And that just slides.
For listeners, these apertures are quite big. I mean, we're talking about a big lens on a big camera.
Yeah.
Little teeny pins. These are, shot glass size holes.
Yeah. And then it just slides between them.
Right. What's the maximum aperture of this in 180 mode?
The 180 is about an f4.5, f5.
Okay, and then in the 360?
Exactly twice that, f9.
Okay, there we go.
And the 180 shoots, the 180 portraits was at f4.5 like use. There was enough room for the strobes that we had on hand to actually work. He just had like 1 strobe. He had like 2,500 watts to play with, right? And 50 ASA paper, but
nice.
Yeah, so they also it turned into a couple of really nice portrait lenses. She's going to have to shoot film, because I know the strobe head she has is like a 600 watt, a portable like 600 watt strobe head. So she's going to have to shoot like a 25 ASA or 50 ASA film for her portraits, but I am shocked. I'll be honest, I'm shocked. Like when you do stuff like this, especially for somebody else, and again, like you have to have some sharpness, right? Something to anchor your eye, or it's a mess. For me, at least, especially for a project like this. And there's some sharpness, and there's a decent circle, even wide open, of that sharpness. And the circle gets bigger and bigger with the apertures, right? And that's the key also for lenses is when you hand make a lens, you need to find the minimum aperture that will give you a big enough circle that's sharp enough to be usable, right? It doesn't do you much good to build a lens, 35 millimeter, whatever, that has like 1/20th of the film plane sharp, and everything else just goes. Like for me, I want to have at least like a fifth or a quarter of that area that I can get relatively sharp results in when I want it, right? And then that expands when you tighten the apertures up. But that wide open lens has that big enough circle of confusion in the middle, which is a weird name for the center part of what's the sharpest thing, to call it the circle of confusion. I don't know. Lens physicists were weird back in the day.
Well,
I'm sure there's a scientific reason for it.
Well, that's describing a much more close-up view of what you're doing. The circle of confusion has to do with pixel peeping, not with the actual size of the circle.
But yeah, so having like when this came out, and it's nice that my buddy Vince is like the master of reverse processing things,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the whole bleach process and everything. So having it come out and like be pretty good, both for landscapes and portraits, was just honestly just such a relief. I spent 5 months building this thing. I don't know what I'm doing. I've never worked with wood before. Every single part of this, most of this was brand new to me. So, like,
what would you do differently starting it again besides make enough room for the springs?
That's a big one.
That,
and I think it's worth pointing out at this point that the early experimentalists in photography didn't know what they were doing either. And so you have the privilege of actually kind of re-experiencing the thrill of invention.
Yes. Yes. Nick always has the best way of putting these things. You're very kind. And yes, it is. Although interesting, like, you know, like Petzval, the guy who created, I think his name was Joseph Petzval, who created the Petzval lens of fame and fortune, still widely sought after, right, lenses and designs. Do you know, I mean, besides the fact that he taught at university, he did this for a living, right? He had a hard science background. Do you know who he used for his math to figure out? Because his whole point was making a fast lens that would do portraits and that would be as optically corrected as possible. You know who he used? Artillery officers.
Oh, yeah.
So the Duke of Austria, I believe it was Austria, the Duke of Austria loaned him a team of like 8 artillery officers because they were the foremost applied mathematicians of the age. They could lob a 50-pound artillery shell however many miles with wind and gravity and other factors and land it accurately and do that math like fast as possible.
You want to do it fast when someone's shooting at you.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't want to blow your guys up while you're at it. So mistakes are costly. And you don't know if you made a mistake because the front is 5 miles away. There's no radio, right? Yeah. There's carrier pigeon. But the one thing they couldn't correct was what is now the infamous Petzval swirl. And that's what they named it after. They used his name for the one thing he couldn't correct. Irony. Right there. Beautiful irony, because it's beautiful, right? And he accepted it. I would love to actually talk to the guy to see if that was, he was just like, fuck it, we can't fix that, we're done. You know, or if that was like, he thought it was pretty, or it was just like, screw it, we're done.
Or he spent the next 20 years adding a third element.
Yeah, banging his head against it, trying to figure it out. Yeah. You know, like, oh, it made me rich, but damn it. But yeah. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. But what would I do differently? I probably, like my original aperture barrel attempt, I went through several iterations. The first one was actually trying to bore out a wood bowl blank. Mm-hmm. I'm still going to bore this out for lens barrel, by the way. Make no fucking mistake. I bought 2 of them. Because once I actually had one of these like hollowed out and I was working to finish it, I dropped it and it cracked and busted.
You didn't want to super glue it?
No. And then I realized that like Alana or anybody in the field is also going to drop it and crack it. So maybe the wood wasn't the best option, as pretty and gorgeous as this would have been. And I'm still going to make a lens barrel out of this sucker. Just you wait. And I ended up with the copper as a second iteration, which is stunning. I'm still going to make a lens with a copper barrel because it's just so gorgeous, but it's super expensive. Where in the end, like this, and it's not the sexiest thing, it's not the worst thing. This works great. It's light, and it was pretty expensive to do. I probably would have just gone right to this and saved myself literally, you don't even know how many hours I spent slowly boring this thing out.
Yeah, and he's holding up the rubber aperture barrel that sits on the front.
I probably will eventually learn how to turn wood on a lathe. I rounded these off with a drill press and like a bolt contraption I made. I sort of like went through the unfinished barrel.
Which, by the way, we're now talking about a lathe.
Yeah, but there's desktop lathes that are fairly inexpensive, and if you're going to turn a wood barrel and do it accurately and make it perfectly round to the dimensions you want, it's a hell of a lot easier and safer than using a freaking drill press and like a jury-rigged holder and some sandpaper.
Hang on 1 second. 1 second. Time out. My headphones died, and...
Oh, his pink headphones died, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, give me a test.
Microphone test
for
you.
Great. We're good.
Okay.
Continue.
So just little things like that. I think the design is pretty good. The other challenge is definitely like with all lenses of this ilk, with no shutters and modern media, like it gets really difficult trying to figure out like, what are you going to shoot? What film or what paper or dry plate or wet plate are you going to shoot? How are you going to shoot it? The lens is really going to dictate her medium. There's no 2 ways about it.
Do you think that your lens and her medium might dictate Wayne building a shutter?
Well, maybe. I worry about, because I thought of like the old Packard shutters and like the front lens that attached.
Or even just like a drop guillotine shutter.
Yeah, possibly. He could possibly build one. I worry about if it's front mounted. Like the stability of that with this sort of setup might not be great, especially if she's shooting at a downward angle. Like everything I test is at a downward angle because that's where stuff falls out.
I see.
Yeah. I don't worry about that. I worry about downward angle. That's where everything falls out. Speaking from painful personal experience.
Couldn't you put it on the back of the lens, maybe?
Possibly. It makes it a little unwieldy, and Wayne might do that. She's going to shoot film. I texted her after we ran the test, and I was like, "What are you gonna do for these portraits?" And she said film. So now she and I...
how big of an opening you need to cover with the shutter?
About 58 millimeters. I love it, dude. Every time Nick gets up, I'm like, what goodie is Nick going to bring back to the camera?
There's always something to camera too.
Cool. Yep. But honestly, with a single strobe pivot indoor, a 25 or 50 ASA film, like the Arista Ortho Litho pushed to 25 ASA, which I've done. It's usually 6. You can push to 2 stops and get great results. I do it all the time. Will work really well. It just depends on if she wants that sort of orthochromatic look and feel of the 1800s or not. Because if she does, it's got to be dry plate, wet plate, paper, or ortholitho. Considering that X-ray film is getting harder and harder to get. Nick, what do you got? Also, Nick, props for the central camera hat, by the way.
Oh yes, this is an honor. This hat was named after me by the the marketing expert Rock Kenwell that we all know on the internet. Okay, so I can't find it off the top of my head, but there's a giant Japanese leaf shutter. I'm not sure it'll cover 58 millimeters, but I'll check when I get a chance.
Okay.
I have a broken one, like doesn't work, but it's similar to the really big Ilex shutters, and they're fairly inexpensive from Japan. But they go on the back, and they'll add thickness and all that, so it might not work for you.
Right, and it just depends on how Wayne's going
to mention before I forget. Before I forget, Eric, you need to go out as soon as possible into the library or whatever, and get a book called The Age of Wonder, and it's by Richard Holmes, who's a British poetry critic. Who suddenly wrote a book about the history of science, and it covers 5 different kind of amazing people who discovered things in the 18th century. But William Herschel in particular is who I want you to read that chapter. William Herschel was an early astronomer who built his own telescopes, and the descriptions of how he built and then operated these and discovered the existence of galaxies, it's just mind-blowing. It's wonderful. He was a musician, and he sort of played these things like a cello as he brought the distant galaxies into focus for the first time.
That's awesome.
It's wonderful reading.
Cool. All right. Yeah, absolutely. Also, side note for the listeners out there, speaking of books, Primitive Photography. I'll say it again and again and again. That guy, whom I desperately want to find for the Large Format Photography podcast, he's a total, like, from what I can tell, like, off the grid, not really down with technology kind of guy, which is why he wrote the book. But it has actionable designs for building large format cameras, for building large format film holders, 8x10, by the way, I believe. At least, I want to say 3 different lens designs, how to build them, and also how to make your own salt print paper negatives. His whole premise was digital photography is coming, and it's going to wipe out the traditional photography industry. How do I keep making images when there's no commercial backing? I'm going to do it myself. And that's the entire premise of the book. But for like lens designs and math behind the lens designs and like how to build your own camera, all sorts of stuff, it's like a Bible. It's great. Yeah. He was a little bit
very practical.
Yeah, like foam core construction stuff. Like, you know, although finding the lens elements for his lenses is not easy, but you can just do your own math for your own lenses. Yeah, it's a great book. Highly recommended. 5 stars. Highly recommended. That one. Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the old home place project lens.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting on a box to come, and then I'm gonna like propane burn finish the box because I'm a nerd, and then I'm gonna box it up and send it to her.
Cool. So is there anything else coming down the pike from your twisted mind that you would like to talk about?
I have there's the first triplet I made, and the only triplet I ever made, maybe 4 years ago. Big chunks of glass. That was another total mistake. Like I figured I'll try to make a triplet with a double concave middle negative aperture, like the whole shoot match.
I've got some of those in my bag.
Yeah. She shakes around in front of me. And so I did some math, and I think I got the math right. And I looked for focal lengths from the surplus shed, and I ordered the lenses, and I looked for focal lengths in like fairly close diameters, and I got them, and I didn't realize that the diameters I'd ordered, I didn't really pay much attention besides that they all sort of generally matched. Were gigantic. They're like 63 millimeter diameter lenses. Like they're fucking huge. And I got them in the mail, and I'm like, oh shit, what am I going to do with these things? At that point in time, I was still rolling with paper, and like the dollar bills do not handle that especially with that length to make a triplet. Like the dollar bill will not do this. So I ended up using just like, and I hadn't found black file folders yet. So I just ended up using like just tan file folder paper and foam to make this crazy triplet. And I shot it with 4x5 and I didn't necessarily really like it that much. And then I gave it to a buddy of mine, Vince, the guy I was at his place at yesterday, and he shot some nice portraits with it on his 8x10. So I remeasured it yesterday when I was at his house, and I've got this giant chunk of maple. So I'm dead set. I'm going to turn this, which is about 100 millimeters in diameter, which gives me like 20 millimeters of thickness on either side. So it's there'll be some nice thick walls. I'll hopefully be film industrial. So I'm going to hopefully turn this into a triplet lens barrel and revisit that triplet, the first triplet the only triplet I've ever made, and make it into something that isn't like totally janky file folder lens, which will be a fun challenge to figure out like how to drill out and turn like a chunk of wood like this into something that will hold 3 distinct lenses with the Waterhouse aperture. Nick,
may I suggest that you make 3 cylinders?
Well, maybe. Then the challenge is like mating them together in a way where they don't fall apart later.
Why not 8?
Like one piece.
There's a tool. There's a tool called a router.
Well, yes.
And the little trim routers are not terribly expensive.
Okay.
And there's a thing called a router table that makes them easy to use.
Yes, but those get a little more expensive. We have a router. We don't have a router table.
No,
I'm
that's
still operating
easy
on
to make yourself. It's a piece of wood with a hole in it.
Fair.
Router table. It's easy. 1 part table, 1 part router. What's there not to get?
Drill legs. Fair. We might do that. We have some spare. Get
a table and drill a hole in it. Now you have a router table.
And mount a router to the bottom. Yeah, I could do that. I might do that.
It is actually a really, really useful tool because you can then use crude tools for everything else and then simply refine them with the router. And it's like the way you can do so much with a drill press. It's kind of it's not this fast, speedy production thing, but it does allow a lot of precision.
Right.
So you can rough things out with a cheap, hand tool and then make it precise with it.
By the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know, Nick is an extremely highly accomplished metalsmith and like fabricator of the physical things like himself. Like he runs a pretty sizable shop / business doing this for art and for other sorts of things. So whereas I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. So Nick is like genuinely an expert in exactly what he is talking about.
Except for I tend to do things the old way. I'm not an expert in high tech. So Ethan and I are like the two sides of how to get to the same place.
Yeah. But professionally, where I'm just like stumbling around, bashing my head against the wall going, ow.
I did find this giant Japanese shutter, and I just measured in its actual throat is 58 millimeters, but it looks like the shutter doesn't open quite as big as that. It looks more like 50, 52.
Well, that's generally fine because the maximum size, like in the center, what I ended up doing is about an inch and a half, basically 1.25 inches, I want to say. So as long as the shutter opening is larger than the smallest opening in the lens, and it won't force a vignette by being behind it, right? Then that's probably fine. Mm-hmm. Although with that throat size, I could literally have used that lens with these elements and just like fit the elements onto either side of the shutter, because that's like pretty much exactly the diameter of these lenses.
A future possible option, but it's also got a thickness of a fair amount.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
The threads are some, who knows. The threads are some who knows what. I haven't even checked, but that doesn't matter if you're working with wood because you can just, sort of screw it in there.
Yeah,
and a 50 millimeter aperture on a 150 lens is an f3, which is a pretty wide open lens.
Yeah. The 180 is an f4.5. Again, right? So it's pretty wide open.
So these are common on eBay from Japan. This one didn't work when it arrived, and so the person just refunded the money. And then I tried to fix it since it was free. He didn't want it back, and I made it even worse than before. So, for practice.
For all of us out here, what is the name? What is the make of that shutter? Like, what is it?
It's a Chanel 5A, and the Chanel 5A It's just a shutter. They also make another version that has an aperture built in as well. And
So
it's
what is the
this is
spell Chanel?
SHANEL, and it's from Musashino Koki. And it's got M and X sync for flash. It's B and 1 second through 100.
And the A model is the one with
thing.
no aperture, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and then there's a B, I believe, that has the aperture built in.
Yeah, and you're right. You can buy complete
can
lenses with these things. They're super cheap. $120 with the lens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And
yeah.
they're very simple and they seem pretty well made. I just ruined this one.
Cool. I'll have to throw this Wayne's way. Again, my only concern is when you put that much distance in front of the back element, it has a high chance of vignetting. I've learned from painful experience.
Well,
I built a few of my.
Your camera may be too deep as well. That's the other issue I run into.
Yeah, I've made a few of my lenses onto like couple zeros and ones, and rapidly, because you can get different adapters to thread like this onto the front of a couple zero, but when you space that out,
you've seen the Ilex shutters
badly.
Yeah.
So you end up having to take the element and try to figure out a way to place it behind the shutter and affixing it in such a way as that's not going to fall out or fall into the shutter itself. It gets kind of interesting, but that's how you get rid of that massive vignetting caused by having the shutter behind the lens.
Fuji used these lenses on a 210 4.5, which means just by doing the math, it's a 55 millimeter diameter maximum on that. So that's a pretty big. That is a pretty big opening.
Not messing around, man.
Yeah,
you know.
I think an Ilex number 4 is in the same ballpark, and they are not super expensive, and they're available around this country. Ilex number 4, and there are people who make adapters to them, but you don't need that.
Yeah. If you put a 90 millimeter element on that, you'd have a 90 millimeter f1.8 for that might cover 8x10. Think about the depth of field on that. So
the other thing that is within the realm of possibility is to figure out a way to adapt a focal plane shutter from something like a speed graphic.
Right.
And I have a speed graphic that has nothing left of it but the focal plane shutter. If you want to try messing with that.
Maybe.
That would
because then you would essentially just mount that, just put that essentially into the front standard, right?
Yeah, it's a 4x5 opening. It's
which would be plenty sizable. Like you could use a 2x3 because this is a 3x3, 3" by 3" standard sort of lens board size. Right. I tried to use a standard lens board size so that if like on Wayne's camera, he can use that standard and mount commercial lenses on it. I didn't want to limit him to making his camera bespoke to the lens. I wanted to at least allow him the ability to mount commercial lenses on the camera too. Because if my lens didn't turn out, I wanted to make sure he had options, right? So, and also I should probably go in about 6 to 10 minutes and get to the day job part.
Yeah, Ethan and I were just talking about that. So Erik, besides the large format photography podcast, how can people find you?
Pretty much on Instagram is my main image. You'll see lenses, you'll see occasional photographs when I manage to take photographs. And as you guys have alluded to, bunnies. Yeah, we do rabbit rescue.
Erik, what is that Instagram handle?
My name, actually, I'm pretty Stone Axe simple myself. ErikHmathy.
Great.
And let's see. Is there anybody you would like to shout out that you haven't already? Anything you want to reiterate?
Well, obviously, shout out to you all. I mean, I think this community is great as much as also we like to. I mean, Nick has been a tremendous help brainstorming with a lot of stuff. You've been an inspiration, Graham, and also fun to chat to with. Hanging out with Ethan during the day when it's slow while he's just like grinding away. Another screw. Ethan Moses.
Oh my God.
Webcast. you're like the Eeyore, like doing another screw, soldering a wire. Please talk to me. But in seriousness, you three are really, you're really wonderful and really welcoming, and I think helping this community grow. But then, the guys, Simon and Andrew, are fantastic. My long-suffering fiance, who's patiently waiting for her first cup of coffee because the coffee machine's right there.
You're brutal.
I am brutal. Sorry, love. And just all the people who've come before me, and I think also with this particular project, Wayne and Alana, for having faith that I could do this and that I could step up to this plate. And I genuinely, frantically hope that it will meet her expectations and will perform well. So
cool. Look, we're looking forward to it. Well, it's been really nice to be along for the ride too. So thanks for sharing the development.
Yeah, my pleasure. And for folks out there, I wanted to tell you, like, if you think what I'm doing is interesting, like, I am literally not a rocket scientist. I don't have a degree in any of this. Like, if what I do seems interesting, I guarantee you that you can do this, and you can probably do it. You can absolutely do it as well as, and probably better than I am. Right? 100%, no question. So if you think this sort of stuff is interesting, just you can feel free to ping me anytime. I'll give you whatever knowledge I know, but just start at it, because for sure you are capable of this.
And on the YouTube feed, I dropped the link to the Google math, the Google spreadsheet that has the math for this. I will also post it in the show notes for the podcast version. So Nick, how do people get a hold of you?
Instagram, AVYNICK, and Flickr is where I post more experimental and more detail, and that's Nick Lyle, Lyle.
And also,
that's
Nick.
Really.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go on. What you say?
I was going to say also Nick at homemadecamera.com.
Oh, right. Yeah, for sending messages. All right.
Oh, yeah, that.
Ethan is Ethan at Cameradactyl. No, Cameradactyl at Gmail. No, it is Bronco Pan at
just come down to E66 and make a right on Zuni. I'll see you here in Albuquerque.
There we
go. It's Eeyore at
Eeyore. That's right.
All right, and I did have a sort of a shout out. It's a comment. So I heard earlier that someone out in the internet podcasting world was complaining that the Homemade Camera podcast was meant to be about making cameras, not about shooting them. And I disagree. This is a podcast about homemade cameras, not necessarily about making them, but also about using them. And also asking us to avoid that topic would be like telling the R&D department that they can't use the cameras they make. It would be silly.
That's right. So also
that's my comment.
Also, Nick, when did you and I get together and decide to do this? Was that part of our manifesto? I don't think so. So
no, we basically wrote a manifesto that included every conceivable topic, including.
You have a manifesto? Damn.
Yes.
That's
yes.
You have to go back to the very first episode or two.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
0.
I want to do a quick shout out once again, Fred at this is not an email, but Fred at the Surplus Shed.
Yeah, Fred.
SurplusShed.com. Without him, we probably would not be having this show.
He's so nice too.
More difficult. And yeah, okay, I'll quit with that. I am Graham Homemade Camera on Instagram, and I have a second feed that I've been doing all of my non-objective photography that has gotten me through the tail end of the COVID nightmare. Let's hope the tail end. And that is Down the Fidelity Curve on Instagram. Pinhole Dom also is lens_punk, who also kind of spurred on today's show. So thanks to everybody, and we shall see and talk to you next time when we'll have another guest.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. That was fun.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.
We've been planning this for a while. I'm glad we finally pulled the trigger.
All right, I'm going to run the credits. Hold on for 1 second.
Okay, credits. Thanks. Oh, and thanks, Robbie.
Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks,
Robbie. We actually have